In the Book of the Damned by Charles Fort, he says, "Truth is by which there is nothing. Nothing to modify it, nothing to question it, nothing by which forms an exception. The all-inclusive, the complete. By truth, I mean the universe." And he goes on to explain that in order to understand anything, we have to understand everything, because the world, in comparison to the universe, is very small. Now this might be a really hard thing to understand, the universe, and really understanding the entire universe would be nearly impossible. But aside from the universe, what does it really take to understand? First, we have to know the difference between know and understand. We know that 2 plus 2 equals 4, but do we understand why it is? Know is more of a what question, whereas understand is more of a why. We know what 2 is, we know what 4 is, and we understand that when 2 and 2 are put together, they become 4. But why do we understand that? There's some linguistics behind that, because 2 is just the word that we assign to an amount that is more than 1 and less than 3. And we know that when that amount is put with the same amount, it equals a larger amount that happens to be called 4. If we had learned while we were in grade school that 2 plus 2 equals fish, because fish was the word that we assigned to the amount that is 4, we would have spent our entire lives thinking that 2 plus 2 equals fish, because that's how we would have understood it. That was a long explanation for something as simple as 2 plus 2 equals 4. So imagine that on the scale of the entire universe. Scientists are trying right now. They're working on something known as M theory, or master theory, the theory of literally everything. What they're attempting to do is connect the 4 forces of nature: strong nuclear forces, weak nuclear forces, gravity, and electromagnetic forces. The difficult part is that scientists don't understand gravity. Yes, they understand gravity is a force, but the problem with gravity is its infinity. If you have 2 particles, they're acting gravity on one another, and then they get further and further and further apart, and yet they continue to act gravity on one another. It doesn't matter how far apart these 2 particles get, they will always be acting on one another with gravity. So what scientists are having trouble with is understanding the idea of infinity. You can't even really understand infinity. You can think about it as a symbol or a figure of speech, but you cannot really imagine never ending, because you've never experienced it. Because everything that we know of dies. Michio Kaku theorized string theory in the 1970s, which really set off the race towards trying to find an ultimate theory for everything. Unfortunately, his theory required the existence of 10 dimensions, and we currently only know of 4, being the 3 spatial dimensions and time. And 10 dimensions are really hard to comprehend or understand. Another theory by A. Garrett Lissy is E8, and it's actually been successfully graphed to work. But unfortunately, his theory requires the existence of 248 dimensions in order to successfully work. We also see several other theories, but unfortunately, despite all being in the same area, they can't be connected. One of the views that I really liked was the M theory planet, which showed what we know and what we don't about M theory. Understanding on a universal level isn't for everybody, and for that purpose, Dr. Benjamin Bloom created Bloom's taxonomy, used very frequently in education. In this diagram, you can see that understanding really is only the second step on learning something. You must know it, then understand it, and then eventually get to the point where you can recreate it. What we see is that infants, we learn words. we know the words the, tree, and grew. We know those words individually, but then we don't really understand what the words mean. But as we continue to grow and through repetition, we learn new words. We learn that the is an article, and tree is a noun, and grew is a verb. And eventually, once we understand their meanings and the way they work together, we can create the sentence, the tree grew. So, in order to understand, we need to understand what is important to understand. So what's really worth understanding? We have to understand that we as humans have limits physically and mentally. This fact has caused several of the greatest bodies and minds to deteriorate. Einstein realized that he had to place limits on himself in order to be truly creative. He couldn't allow himself to be completely satisfied. On the note of understanding, he said, "Any fool can know. The point is to understand." We also have to understand that we are part of a universe. The universe is not part of us. We must also understand that if we understand the universe, then nothing is random. But if we don't want to go to those lengths, we have to accept random occurrences. We have to understand how much time we really have left. As covered in Your Life in Jelly Beans by Z. Frank. Understanding completely is impossible. Despite M theory and the different kinds of learning, we all have something we excel at, and we will undoubtedly understand that. But more importantly, we have to understand each other. Because we may not be able to understand the universe, but we can understand our world. Remember, never stop asking questions, and you've been scienced.